Welcome to Season 3 of the Ag Policy Podcast. I'm Josh Baethge. I write about U.S. food and agriculture policy for Farm Progress. This season, we're changing things up a bit. Over the next couple of months, I'm going to be talking with various people around the United States about the current state of the agriculture industry. As many as you probably know, sluggish demand, high input costs, low commodity prices are creating a situation that many analysts are now calling a crisis. Joining me today to discuss exactly what's going on here is Jacqueline Holland, an economist from the American Soybean Association. Jackie grew up on a dairy farm. She worked in finance roles at food manufacturing companies before becoming a grain analyst. Full disclosure, Jackie and I also worked together for a little bit. She's one of my favorite people to nerd out with about all things agriculture. Jackie, really excited to have you here today. How you doing?
I'm good, Josh. Thank you for having me. That was a great intro. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Well, as much as I'd love to chat with you here about breweries, restaurants, food, I suppose we got a lot of ground to cover here. So let's just dive right in. It's no secret these are tough economic times for farmers. Can you just give us a broad overview of the factors driving this downturn and how soybean farmers in particular have been impacted by this?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a colleague the other day make the comment, it's everything, everywhere, all at once for soybean farmers right now. And I think that's how everybody in the row crop community feels because there's so many different factors that are at play here. Farmers are navigating the fallout from tariffs, both at the production level and at the input level. Production costs are rising. Part of that is due to tariffs as well, but some of it also stems from geopolitical uncertainty. Farmers have lost access to critical markets very suddenly, and there are other markets that we are not sure about what the trajectory for that future growth looks like. There's higher freight and transportation costs incoming soon due to the Section 301 shipbuilding regulation changes. The Mississippi River is low at our export season, and farmers are contending with expanding South American production. So there's more international competition for these products. And this year especially, just we know that there's going to be some storage challenges too, as as soybean crops compete with a massive corn crop. So those are it's an exhaustive list, but I'm probably missing a few factors there that farmers are dealing with, and as a result of that, our soybean growers are earning lower crop revenues. They are paying more for inputs, so that means that they have less profitable margins. In a lot of cases, that means they're incurring losses. So that results in decreased liquidity, decreased solvency, more financial struggles, and there's a lot of geographic variance to it as well. So it's, growers in the heartland might not be facing these pressures near as impactfully as growers in the South or growers in the upper Midwest.
So that surely is a little bit of everything. That's even more extensive than I realized. But and you talked about a little bit about the profitability there. I've heard a couple of people tell me. And I don't know if this is anecdotally or if this is actually a reality, that most soybean farmers may not even turn a profit this year. What is the data telling you about that? Is that truly the case, or are most soybean farmers not going to even make money this year?
Again, there's going to be geographic variances, but overall, yes. ERS data projects that 2025 cost of production for soybeans will be just over $12 a bushel. Futures prices for soybeans for the nearby November 2025 contract dipped below the $10 benchmark yesterday, right before President Trump announced upcoming trade talks with China. But for producers relying on export markets, particularly our growers in North Dakota, in northern Minnesota, in the upper Midwest, cash prices have have fallen at least $1.70 per bushel below futures prices. So that means that based on current prices, they are selling crops off the combine anywhere from $8.40 a bushel to $8.50 a bushel. That's over a $3.50 loss in a lot of cases, which is untenable for many, many farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of almost the worst case scenario. Kind of diving into some of these things, these different factors you talked about. I know that the ASA is really, really pushing the administration to, get a new trade deal with China. And, that's being driven in large part, by the export market this year. China, I believe, usually accounts for more than half of all soybean exports from the United States every year. Talk about what those numbers look like this year and how that's factoring into a lot of these problems soybean farmers are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for a little bit of context, at one point before all of these trade issues cropped up, 1 in 3 rows of soybeans were shipped to China. 1 in 3 rows of
Wow.
soybeans grown in the US, excuse me, were shipped to
Right.
China.
Yeah.
Uh, Last year, that number was probably closer to 1 in 5 rows of soybeans. And China is the world's largest buyer of soybeans by no small margin. No one else compares. On average, about 61% of global soybean purchases to feed protein producing livestock in China are are made by China. So that's more than the rest of the world than the soybeans that the rest of the world is buying combined. So if you're growing soybeans in any place in the world, you really need to have some sort of market presence in China to support cost of production to grow those beans.
Right. And just out of curiosity, real quick, I'm curious why, obviously we know that the sheer size of China, and you mentioned the livestock feed, but is there another reason why demand in China is so great? Why does China consume that many more soybeans? Is it mainly for livestock, or is it, cultural differences for food, or just, I'm just curious about that. I've never really thought about that before.
So China has a population of about 1.3 billion people, and as their economy has grown and expanded in the last 50 years, their consumers have developed stronger preferences for protein products. So whether that's more poultry, especially more pork, more aquaculture, and to some extent more beef and
Hmm.
dairy. Those are all inputs those are all products that require a protein source to build that final protein food product. And soybean is a key component in feed rations for all of those, except for beef. But
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
hog production, for poultry production especially, soy meal is a really important part of getting those essential amino acids into those animals to grow them to be viable protein sources for
Sure.
Chinese citizens.
Okay. So we talked about, how much soybeans typically go to China every year, how great the demand is for them. We're recording this right now at the very beginning of October. At this point in the year, how many orders of soybeans has China ordered from the U.S.?
I think in a usual year it's about 12 million metric tons. But this year there are absolutely no sales to China on the books.
Right, which is obviously devastating to American farmers. And I think we have some precedent for how. And I think the administration blames the Trump administration. Says there are trade issues and unfair trade practices in Brazil that are factoring into this. But I would say, I think it's fair to say most economists say the blame on this squarely falls on tariffs. U.S. imposed tariffs on China. China imposed retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. and they're simply able to buy for a much more competitive price from South America, particularly Brazil. I mean, in a nutshell, that's fair to say, right?
Yeah, in the pricing data completely supports that. Right now,
Yeah,
US prices are among the cheapest in the world as we're harvesting all of our soybeans. However, when you factor in the additional 20% retaliatory tariff that China has placed back on US shipments, the cost of soybeans in Brazil, in Argentina, and Uruguay are actually much more affordable than the lower priced US soybeans with that 20% tariff. So
right.
we're we are just completely lacking our,
Yeah.
a cost advantage in the biggest market in the world for soybeans.
Yeah, and we've seen this story before. If we go back to the first Trump administration in 2018, there was a trade dispute, I believe, between 2018 2019, and then the U.S. and China ended up working out a deal, and the trade resumed. But even though that trade war, was in essence solved, within a year, soybean farmers in the United States did not. Get back some of that market share. Can you talk about briefly just how that, it's not just the short term effect, but long term, there's a fear among soybean producers that this market share could permanently be lost to newer producers like Brazil, Argentina is upping their supply. Just talk a little bit about what the data from back then, the first trade war, shows us about how this will impact us long term.
So the trade war in 2018 was actually very fundamentally different from the trade situation that are seeing currently. Um, in 2018, China's hog herd was cut by over a half due to African swine flu. So it was just a natural decrease in demand. Even if China could buy those soybeans, they didn't have any place or any animals to feed them to. So the timing worked out well for the Chinese. They didn't need soybeans from us, and they could kind of use that as a political tool to leverage negotiations with. This time it's different. ASF has become pretty well controlled within China. They've rebuilt their hog herd, and protein consumption by consumers continues to increase.
And real quick, just for those not familiar, I don't mean to interrupt you, but ASF, can you tell me what that is real quick?
Yes, African swine fever.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry. Okay, Karen.
It's a very deadly disease for hogs.
Right.
Um, it took out, like I said, it took out over half of China's hog herd. Spreads really quickly, in, infects very rapidly. It is just absolutely fatal for hog producers. So,
Yeah.
especially with so many hogs in China being produced at just at the community level, the phytosanitary, I think, is the right word to describe it. The
Lots of fun with.
phytosanitary conditions just weren't the same as they would have been with a larger commercial
Right.
producer, which Chinese hog production has gone more
Gotcha.
forward since then.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So, but even then, under different conditions, the federal government ended up allocating, depending on the number you see, somewhere between 23 billion to almost $30 billion to offset some of these losses. And this time around, there's a lot of talk that the federal government, in some capacity, is will need to step in again to save a lot of these farmers. I mean, do you have any idea what amount of money would be required this time around, given the situation the soybean farmers are facing, that could possibly offset these losses? I mean, I haven't seen the figure, but I would assume it's a much larger amount than 23 billion.
There's still a lot of work being done to estimate these losses.
Sure.
So that's why a number hasn't been floated in the industry yet. It's hard to measure because we are in the middle of this right now.
Right.
This is our peak export season, and we're not seeing those exports. So we don't have the data we need yet to accurately measure the true economic losses being incurred at the farm level. We know it's there, and we know that it incentivizes producers in Brazil to produce more, which puts us at a further market advantage.
Sure.
So, disadvantage, excuse
Right.
me.
I followed you on that one. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yes.
So now, because of all these factors, you got a lot of soybean farmers either A, don't have a place to sell, or B, want to hold out because the prices are so low. So we're seeing an increase of harvest being stored across the country. And I'm curious, number one, just how that impacts farmers' bottom line, and number two, is storage, grain storage, becoming an issue in terms of capacity in the U.S.
So that's kind of an uncertain bet this year. The soybean futures forward curve is currently showing a wide spread, which means that prices for soybeans to be delivered this fall are much lower than prices for soybeans in the US to be delivered to an end user next spring or next summer. Another way of looking at it is that there just aren't a lot of buyers interested in US soybeans this fall, incentivizing growers to hold on to their crop, store it, and sell it at a later date and hopefully at a higher price.
Sure.
But there's no guarantee that we're going to see that price appreciation, especially if we don't get any sales to China
Right.
in the next month or so. So
Gotcha.
that makes it less likely that those cash and futures prices are going to appreciate enough into next spring and next summer to pay for the storage costs that farmers are incurring to hold on to their crop.
Sure.
And also the timing doesn't exactly favor US supplies either. Brazil's crop is usually harvested at the beginning of the calendar year. So by February or so, they're ready to export a lot of volume, and they typically pull back on buying from the US at that point. We know that China has orders booked all the way through November and into
Mm-hmm.
December from South American sources as well as Eastern European and Central Asian sources.
That's the scary part because, like you said, this is our usually the U.S. window right now. Here, September, the fall
Exactly.
season, and China already has a lot of this demand apparently covered, and like you said, no orders from U.S. farmers at this point.
Yeah, it's a really risky bet for US farmers, especially considering higher storage costs. You're facing competition with a massive corn crop. But the alternative is also to sell at, I think I mentioned, a $3.50 bushel loss. So
Right.
several dollars well below the cost of production. So farmers are really in an impossible situation
Right.
with trying to figure out what's going to be the best way to cover this year's expenses.
Yeah, and you talk about expenses. We've spent a lot of this conversation talking about trade and low prices, but farmers are also being hit with these skyrocketing input costs, everything from machinery to seeds and fertilizer. Can you touch on that just a little bit about like which costs are impacting soybean and row crop farmers the most, and is there anything that can be done about that? Because a lot of that is well, you tell me. I'm curious what your data shows on that.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, it is everything, everywhere, all at once.
Right.
Not just on the revenue side of the profit and loss statement, but also on the expense side as well. So looking at farmers are facing higher interest rates. This is a really big one that that is hitting farmers extra hard, because not only do they have higher interest rates, the cost of production has increased so much, and they're earning less revenue. So they are having to borrow more and having to pay much higher interest amounts on that. So it's kind of a triple compound effect for interest costs.
Sure.
We also know that tariffs are going to increase pesticide costs because we import a lot of pesticide raw materials from China, the UK, India, Switzerland. We're seeing the same issue with machinery and parts. A lot of those come from overseas as well, like Canada, Mexico, Southeast Asia, the EU, as well as fertilizers. There are still countervailing duties on on phosphate supplies from Morocco and Russia, which are two major phosphate producers.
Hmm.
So the phosphate that we can get our hands on now is not the lowest priced, and it is more difficult to pay to get here to
Sure.
the US. Um, Looking at nitrogen, a lot of the Russia dynamics are still at play there. Um, so it's costs for everything across the board. Labor costs
Sure.
are higher. Um, service repairs are going to be higher just because hourly rates are going up.
Right.
So it's, again, everything, everywhere, all at once.
I understand. Well, real quick here, just a couple more things I'd like to chat with you before you got to run. There obviously we've talked a lot about the bad. I'd like to just touch on briefly some of the things that could help soybean farmers. And there's a lot of talk. Obviously China is the big elephant in the room. That's a direct quote from Caleb Ragland, the president, elephant in the room. But there's also a big push to get negotiate trade deals with other countries. I know there's a recent deal with Japan, I believe the UK earlier this summer. Talk about, are there any particular markets out there that are untapped for U.S. farmers that if a new trade deal open up these markets would really really benefit them? I'm curious. I mean, obviously you don't have another country the size of China, but what are some of the opportunities out there in terms of trade?
Yeah, I think especially highlighting the recent deals that this administration has done. Um, though, those are have been great prospects for U.S. soy, but we need to also get sales on the books to those countries.
Right.
So, perhaps further down the road, or as the administration continues those talks, they can be more assertive with these countries. Excuse me, in saying that there needs to be purchases made, not just a promise to make a purchase.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Got to see results at the end of the day. I think that's what everybody wants to see in a nutshell,
yep,
right? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, the administration is conversing with these countries, so that's a positive sign. We just need more action
And I'm
to boost prices.
right, and I'm assuming the ASA has people whispering to people at USDA and the administration trying to push these priorities forward as much as possible. I would imagine is that kind of going on the scenes. At least that's what I understand.
Yeah, all of the commodity groups are working to really make sure that the administration is looking out for the best interest of their farmers. And ASA has taken a very vocal role, especially in these trade issues, because our farmers' incomes are so reliant on pricing from trade transactions.
Right.
So yes, we have written reports. We have had conversations at just about every level of the government, with USDA, with the Commerce Secretary's office, with the White House, with state and local legislators as well, and all of our congressmen our people on the Hill.
Yeah.
So we have, there's a lot of days that our team is burning the midnight oil to make sure that we're communicating our farmers' needs and the significance of these economic impacts to the people that have the ability to improve these outcomes for rural America at the end of the day.
Gotcha. Last thing I want to ask you, just, looking ahead to 2026, we had some provisions in the budget reconciliation bill that was passed this summer, commonly known as the Big Beautiful Bill. There's some provisions in there in terms of farm safety net that are expected to benefit, farmers all around. But, given all the uncertainty with trade, with costs, with tariffs, is there any way to make an informed projection about how next year's growing season will be, or is it just massive uncertainty at this point?
Yeah, I think the massive uncertainty is definitely, I feel like a broken record saying it, but yeah, the massive uncertainty really has been the key factor, just upending the whole economy since the beginning of April.
Well, I think that's what we'll probably call this episode then. The crisis in agriculture, the massive uncertainty. That's our new title here. So
yeah, no, and I don't mean to laugh. I'm laughing so I don't cry, but it's especially with, we're recording this podcast on the second day of the government shutdown too.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about that.
No, I didn't, but that's definitely it can be a problem for producers, especially producers like younger producers who are reliant on FSA young farmer loans.
Hey, Jackie, you cut out that real quick.
Yep.
Right before you start, right before you said younger farmers. Okay, sorry. Come on.
Yep. Yeah, and the issue with the government shutdown is that it impacts federal farm agencies that provide resources, especially to younger farmers just getting started, farmers who may not be quite as established but are still trying to build up their equity to have a place in the future of rural America. So the uncertainty is making it really hard to figure out, where these markets could be going, what our potential opportunities could be, and how deep these losses are going to impact just a really critical portion of the American economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, I think we're just about out of time here. Thanks again to Jackie Holland from the American Soybean Association for joining us today. You can check out more of her work online at soygrowers.org. It provides a lot of great analysis there. I also want to thank our producer, Hans-Jörg Jaeger, for his work putting this podcast together. He's the brains behind this whole endeavor, and he'll be back on with me soon to discuss how some of these U.S. issues we talked about today are also impacting farmers and policy decisions in Switzerland and across the EU. In our next episode, I'm going to be chatting with an American farmer about how the current challenges facing agriculture are affecting his operations and his family. If you liked what you heard here, we'd love it if you liked and subscribed to us. We're on Spotify, LinkedIn, and YouTube. In the meantime, if you'd like to read more about some of the issues driving the world of agriculture, you can find my work at farmprogress.com. We have an amazing team of writers and reporters, and hope you take a second to check us out. Until next time, this is the Ag Policy Podcast. I'm Josh Baethge. Thanks for tuning in.